The morning fog rolled thick off the Hudson River, swallowing the remains of the Old Riverside Bridge in grey silence. Claire Matheson stood at the edge of the crumbling access road, her worn coat pulled tight against the November cold, staring at what the lawyer's letter had described as her inheritance. A collapsed bridge tollhouse, 3 months since Michael's funeral, and the world kept finding new ways to mock her grief. The tollhouse, if you could still call it that, leaned at a sickening angle, half its structure already surrendered to the riverbank below. What remained looked like a tooth rotting in the mouth of the landscape. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Black with water damage and time, Claire's daughter, Amy, pressed against her side, the 7-year-old's breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Is that really ours, Mama?" "Apparently," Claire said, her voice hollow. She clutched the legal document that had arrived yesterday, still not quite believing it. Her late husband's great-uncle, a man named Howard Matheson, whom she'd never met, had left her this ruin in his will. The letter from the estate attorney had been apologetic but clear. The property was hers, along with the considerable tax burden that came with it. Behind them, a truck door slammed. Claire turned to see Gerald Wexler approaching, his contractor's boots crunching on gravel. He'd been at the diner yesterday when she'd opened the letter, and he'd offered to come assess the damage. At the time, it had seemed kind. Now, watching his expression as he surveyed the wreckage, Claire recognized something else in his eyes. Calculation. "Jesus, Claire," Gerald whistled low. "I told you it was bad, but this is worse than I thought." He pulled out his phone, snapping photos. "That whole eastern wall is gone. Foundations probably compromised. Hell, the whole thing could slide into the river any day now." Claire's stomach twisted. The property taxes alone were $8,000 annually. Money she didn't have. Money she'd never have. Working double shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide while barely keeping their apartment. "How much to tear it down?" she asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. Gerald scratched his jaw, still circling the structure. "Demolition on something like this, with river access concerns and environmental permits, you're looking at $45,000 minimum. Maybe more if we hit complications." The number hit Claire like a physical blow. $45,000. She had $1,200 in savings. Michael's life insurance had covered the funeral and 3 months of rent. Nothing more. "What if I just leave it?" Claire asked quietly. "County'll fine you. Unsafe structure this close to public land?" Gerald shook his head. "They'll start at $500 a week and go up from there until you either fix it or demolish it. And if you don't, they'll do it themselves and put a lien on your other assets." Claire almost laughed. Other assets. The 13-year-old Honda with 180,000 miles was her most valuable possession after their apartment security deposit. Amy tugged at her coat. "Mama, can we go closer? I want to see inside." "Absolutely not," Claire said firmly. "It's not safe." But Gerald was already moving toward the structure, his contractor's curiosity overriding common sense. "Actually, let me just check the foundation real quick. Might not be as bad as it looks." Claire watched him approach the leaning tollhouse, her heart hammering. Every instinct screamed danger, but Gerald moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years in construction. He disappeared through the sagging doorway. Silence. Stretched. Then, from inside, "Holy shit. Gerald?" Claire called out, alarm rising in her throat. He emerged, his face pale beneath his sun-weathered skin. In his hand was something that looked like a metal box, old and encrusted with rust. "Claire, you need to see this." Against her better judgment, Claire left Amy by the car and picked her way across the debris-strewn ground. The tollhouse interior was worse than the outside suggested: rotted floorboards, exposed beams black with mold, and water dripping from countless cracks. But Gerald was pointing at something that made her breath catch. Where the floor had collapsed near the back wall, she could see stone. Not just foundation stones, but something else. Worked stone, fitted together with the precision of intentional construction, and in the center of the exposed section, a metal handle protruded from what looked like a massive stone lid. "That's not original to the Tollhouse," Gerald said, his voice tight with barely controlled excitement. "That's something older, something underneath." Claire knelt carefully, testing the floor's strength before putting her weight on it. The metal box Gerald had found sat beside the hole. She picked it up, surprised by its weight. The rust flaked off under her fingers, revealing engraved brass beneath. There were symbols on the pryther. Lid, not letters, but numbers. A date, 1929. "Prohibition era," Gerald said. And now there was no mistaking the greed in his voice. "Claire, do you know what this could be?" She didn't answer. Her fingers had found the latch on the box. It opened with a screech of old metal, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow survived decades, was a leather journal and a bundle of papers. Claire carefully unfolded the oilcloth. The journal's cover bore initials: H.L.M. Howard Lawrence Matheson, her husband's great-uncle, the man she'd never met but who'd left her this wreck of a building. She opened the journal to a random page, Michael's face flashing through her memory. He'd had his great-uncle's eyes, she realized. The same intense focus, asterisk. The 15th of September, 1929. Asterisk. Asterisk. The construction is nearly complete. Salvatore's men have done excellent work. The foundation vault is invisible from above, and the Tollhouse sits perfectly over the entrance. No one will suspect that the real purpose of this building has nothing to do with collecting bridge tolls. Asterisk, asterisk. The families have entrusted me with everything: their wealth, their futures, their desperate hope that America will prove safer than the chaos consuming Europe. I've converted it all to bearer bonds and gold. As agreed, $467 million worth. By my calculation, though such numbers feel abstract when held against the weight of so many lives hanging in the balance. Asterisk. Claire's hands shook as she read. She flipped forward through the journal, page after page of meticulous records. Names of families, amounts deposited, dates, promises made. Asterisk. The 24th of October, 1929. Asterisk. Asterisk. The market has crashed. Everything we feared has come to pass. The families are trapped now, their assets frozen in European banks, their escape routes disappearing. They're calling my office constantly, begging me to tell them their money is safe, that they'll still be able to bring their children to America. Asterisk. Asterisk. What can I tell them? That I've hidden their fortune in a vault beneath a toll house? That I've been running an illegal operation right under the government's nose, helping families circumvent currency controls and immigration quotas? Asterisk, asterisk. I can tell them nothing. I can only keep my promise, guard their legacy until they can claim it. Asterisk. What does it say? Gerald asked, trying to read over her shoulder. Claire closed the journal instinctively, protecting something she didn't yet understand. It's personal family history. But Gerald wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the stone lid with its metal handle, at the space beneath the collapsed floor. Claire, if what I'm thinking is true, you're not thinking anything, Claire said sharply, recognizing the danger in his expression. This is my property. You're just here to assess the structure. Gerald's face hardened. Fine. Here's my professional assessment. This building is a hazard and needs to come down immediately. I'll give you $15,000 cash for the whole property, save you the demolition costs and tax burden. That's generous of you, Claire said coldly, considering you said demolition would cost $45,000. Claire, be reasonable. I think you should leave. Gerald stared at her for a long moment, anger and calculation warring in his expression. Finally, he turned and walked back to his truck. But before he drove away, he called out, If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. You've got 72 hours before I report this structure to the county as an imminent hazard. Your choice, Claire. 15 grand or $500 a week in fines you can't afford. The truck kicked up gravel as it disappeared down the access road, leaving Claire standing in the doorway of the collapsing Tollhouse, clutching a journal that might contain the answer to everything, or might just be the ravings of an old man. Amy appeared at the edge of the safe zone Claire had established. "Mama, is everything okay?" "No," Claire wanted to say. "Nothing is okay. Your father is dead. We're one medical emergency away from homelessness, and I just inherited a building that might crush me financially, if not literally." But she looked at her daughter's worried face and forced a smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Let's go home." That night, after Amy was asleep, Claire sat at their tiny kitchen table and read Howard Matheson's journal from beginning to end. The story it told was incredible, almost unbelievable. But the documentation was meticulous. Howard had been a banker in New York during the 1922, working with wealthy European families who saw the writing on the wall years before most. The rise of fascism, the growing threats to Jewish families, the political instability they'd known it was coming. And Howard, rather than turn them away or report their attempts to move assets out of Europe, had helped them. He'd converted their holdings to portable wealth, bearer bonds, gold certificates, jewels. He'd promised to keep it safe until they could escape to America themselves. The Tollhouse had been a front. The Old Riverside Bridge was privately owned then, a legitimate business generating enough traffic to explain Howard's presence there. But beneath the building, he'd constructed a vault, a fortress to protect the wealth of families who would be fleeing for their lives. Asterisk. The 12th of June 1942, asterisk. Asterisk. 3 years since I've heard from the Goldstein family. The letters stopped coming from Prague. I fear the worst. Their bonds sit in the vault, waiting for heirs who may never come. Asterisk. Asterisk. I've made a decision. If by war's end there are families who cannot be located, who've been lost to Hitler's madness, their shares will be held in perpetuity. Perhaps someday their descendants will find their way here. Perhaps not. But I will not steal from the dead. I will not profit from genocide. Asterisk. Asterisk. This is my penance and my purpose. Asterisk. Page after page. The same story. Families who made it to America and claimed their assets. Their names marked with DR4, checks in Howard's careful hand. Families who stopped writing, who disappeared into the maw of war. Those names were circled, their fates uncertain. And at the end of the journal, dated just 3 months ago, asterisk. The 3rd of August 2024. Asterisk. Asterisk. I am dying. Cancer, the doctors say, though it hardly matters what name we give it. I've outlived my purpose by decades. Asterisk. Asterisk. The bridge closed in 1965. The Tollhouse has been deteriorating ever since. I've paid the taxes, kept the property in family hands, but I have no children of my own, no direct heirs who remember what lies beneath. Asterisk. Asterisk. I'm leaving it to Claire, Michael's widow. I never met her, but Michael spoke of her often before he died. He said she was the strongest person he'd ever known. Said she could carry weight that would crush most people. Asterisk, asterisk. She'll need that strength now. The vault holds $467 million in assets, give or take. Some of it belongs to families who may still have living descendants. Some of it has no rightful owner left in this world. Asterisk, asterisk. I'm giving Claire a choice I never had. What to do with money that was saved from genocide but can't be returned to the dead. Asterisk, asterisk. It's too much responsibility for one person. But then again, so was keeping the secret for 80 years. And I managed that. Asterisk, asterisk, Claire. If you're reading this, you know the truth now. The foundation vault requires a specific sequence to open. The numbers are hidden in the Tollhouse structure itself. Look for the keystones. The answer is in the architecture. Asterisk, asterisk. What you do with what you find is your decision. But remember, some fortunes carry the weight of too many ghosts. Choose wisely. Asterisk. Claire set down the journal, her hands shaking. $467 million. The number was incomprehensible. It was escape from every financial worry she'd ever had. It was Amy's college education, medical care, security, freedom. It was also a burden she wasn't sure she could carry. Outside her apartment window, the night was dark and still. Claire thought about Gerald Wexler's eyes when he'd seen that stone lid, the hunger in them. She thought about his threat to report the structure, about the 72-hour deadline. He knew, maybe not the full truth, but enough. And he wasn't the type to let $467 million slip away without a fight. Claire pulled out her phone and called the only person she could think of. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Claire? It's 2 in the morning. What's wrong?" Diane Chen had been Michael's best friend since college, and she'd become Claire's closest confidant in the years since his death. More importantly, Diane was a structural engineer and the most practical person Claire knew. "I need your help," Claire said, "and I need you not to ask questions until you see what I'm talking about." "Claire, you're scaring me. Are you okay? Is Amy okay?" "We're fine. But I need you to meet me at a property address tomorrow morning. Early. Before anyone else shows up." Diane was silent for a moment. Then, "Text me the address. I'll be there at 6. The next morning, Claire left Amy with her neighbor, Mrs. Matheson, claiming she had to handle some estate paperwork. It wasn't exactly a lie. She drove to the Tollhouse as dawn was just breaking, the river fog even thicker than yesterday. Diane's car was already there, and she emerged, looking skeptical and concerned in equal measure. "Okay, I'm here. Now tell me what's going on before I decide you've had a breakdown." Claire handed her Howard's journal. "Read the last entry. Then, look at the building." 20 minutes later, Diane looked up from the journal, her engineer's mind clearly racing. "Claire, if this is real, it's real. Gerald Wexler found the vault entrance yesterday. He knows something's down there." Diane stood and approached the Tollhouse, studying it with new eyes. "He said the sequence is hidden in the keystones. That means the architectural support stones, the ones that bear the weight of the structure." She pointed to the arched doorway, where wedge-shaped stones formed the arch. "There. And probably others throughout the building. Can you find them before the building collapses completely?" Diane looked at the leaning structure, clearly calculating risks and probabilities. Finally, she nodded. "We'll need to shore up the south wall first, and we'll have to work fast. But yes, I think we can do this." She turned to Claire, her expression serious. "But first, you need to tell me, what are you going to do with what you find? Because a fortune that size doesn't stay secret. Once that vault opens, your life changes forever." Claire thought about Amy, about the bills stacked on her kitchen counter, about the double shifts and the exhaustion, and the constant anxiety of living one emergency away from disaster. She thought about Howard Matheson, keeping faith with families he'd never see again, guarding wealth that wasn't his for 80 years. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know I'm not selling this property to Gerald Wexler for $15,000. Diane grinned. "Good, because even without the vault, this land is worth at least $200,000. Gerald was planning to rob you blind." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my crew. We need to get this done before your 72 hours are up." The next 2 days passed in a blur. Diane's crew arrived with scaffolding and supports, stabilizing the Tollhouse enough to work safely inside. They moved with the efficiency of people who trusted their engineer completely, asking no questions about why they were saving a building that should have been condemned. Claire had taken sick days from the hospital, something she'd never done unless Amy was ill. The lost wages made her stomach knot, but she had no choice. She needed to be here, needed to see this through. Gerald Wexler drove past 3 times on the first day, slowing to watch the activity. On his third pass, he stopped and got out. "What's all this, Claire? Looks like you're doing repairs instead of demolition." "I've decided to restore the structure," Claire said, keeping her voice level. "It's historic. Might be eligible for preservation grants." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "That's going to cost you a hell of a lot more than 15,000. I've got it covered." "With what money?" Claire met his gaze steadily. "That's not your concern." He left, but Claire noticed him on his phone as he drove away. She didn't like the tight feeling in her chest. Gerald wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. That evening, as Diane's crew packed up for the night, Diane pulled Claire aside. "We found them. The keystones. 6 of them throughout the structure, each marked with a number." Claire's heart hammered. "And the sequence is a date. The 24th of October 1929, the stock market crash. When Howard would have realized the families he was helping were trapped." Diane pulled out a piece of paper with a price diagram. "There's a panel in the floor that looks like regular foundation stone, but it's actually a lock mechanism. If I'm reading this correctly, you input the sequence, and the panel opens. Can we access it safely?" Diane nodded. "The floor's shored up now. We could try tonight, actually. Before..." She stopped. "Before Gerald figures out what we're really doing here and tries to stop us." "Yeah." Claire looked at the darkening sky, then back at the Tollhouse. Every instinct screamed to wait, to be cautious, to think this through. But Gerald's threat hung over her like a guillotine blade, and the 72-hour deadline expired at noon tomorrow. "Let's do it," Claire said. An hour later, Claire and Diane stood inside the Tollhouse, work lights casting harsh shadows across the interior. Diane had sent her crew home. "What they don't know can't get them in trouble," she'd said, and now it was just the 2 of them. The stone panel Diane had identified was near the back wall, camouflaged perfectly as part of the foundation. But when Claire knelt beside it, she could see the hairline seams that separated it from the surrounding stone. Diane had rigged a makeshift input system, using pressure points on the surrounding keystones that corresponded to the date sequence. "Ready?" she asked. Claire nodded, her throat too tight for words. Diane input the sequence. The 24th of October, 1929. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound that hadn't been heard in decades, the stone panel shifted. It rose on hidden pistons, ancient engineering that somehow still functioned, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying a scent of earth and metal and time. Claire pulled out a flashlight and pointed it down. The ladder led to a platform, maybe 10 feet below, and beyond that, she could see the edge of what looked like a massive door. "I'm going down," she said. "Claire, we should..." "I have to see." She descended the plies, ladder carefully, each rung solid despite its age. The platform was stone, part of a larger chamber that extended in all directions. And there, taking up the entire back wall, was a vault door that would have looked at home in a bank. It was enormous, at least 7 feet tall and 5 feet wide, made of steel that had somehow resisted rust. Across its surface were more numbers, a combination lock with 6 digits. Diane climbed down behind her, playing her own flashlight across the chamber. Jesus, Howard really built this thing to last. Claire approached the vault door, running her fingers over the combination dial. What would the numbers be? A date significant to Howard? To the families he'd helped? She thought about the journal, about Howard's meticulous record-keeping. And then she remembered Michael's birthday. Michael, the great-nephew Howard, had apparently kept track of, even if they'd never met. The 6th of June, 1988. The 6th of June, 2088. Claire's hands shook as she turned the dial. Right. to 6, left to 0, right to 6, left to 0, right to 8, left to 8. A click echoed through the chamber, deep and final. The vault door swung open. Claire's flashlight beam caught gold first bars of it, stacked neatly along one wall. Then her light swept across document boxes, dozens of them, each labeled with family names, bearer bonds in protective sleeves, jewelry cases, and against the back wall, a filing system that would have done any bank proud, containing records of everything Howard had promised to protect. "Holy shit," Diane whispered. "It's real. It's all real." Claire walked into the vault on trembling legs. The gold alone she couldn't even guess at its worth. And the bonds, if they were still valid after all these years. Howard had written $467 million, standing here, surrounded by tangible wealth in a form she'd only ever seen in movies. That number suddenly felt very, very real. On a desk in the center of the vault lay one more journal, newer than the others. Claire picked it up and opened to the first page. Asterisk. For Claire. Asterisk, asterisk. If you've found this, you've proven yourself worthy of the choice I'm leaving you. Everything in this vault represents lives saved and lives lost. The families whose names are checked in my ledgers claimed their wealth and built new lives in America. The names with circles those families never came. Asterisk, asterisk. I've tried to locate descendants. The documentation is in the filing cabinets. Some lines ended in the camps. Others scattered to countries around the world. And I lost track of them. A few may still have living heirs who don't know about their family's foresight in moving assets before the war. Asterisk, asterisk. The bonds alone are worth $312 million at current value. The gold adds another $87 million. The jewelry and other assets account for the rest. I've left $5 million in a separate trust for taxes and preservation of this site. The remaining $462 million is yours to steward. Asterisk, asterisk. You have 3 choices. Asterisk, asterisk. 1. Keep it all. It's legally yours through inheritance. Use it to build the life you and Amy deserve. Asterisk, asterisk. 2. Attempt to return assets to any descendants you can find. It's a noble goal, but may prove impossible after so many decades. Asterisk, asterisk. 3. Do what I couldn't. Transform this fortune into something that serves the purpose those families had when they fled protection, safety, a chance at a better life. Asterisk, asterisk. Whatever you choose, choose quickly. Once word gets out, you'll face pressure from every direction. People will have opinions about what you should do with money that never belonged to any of us. Asterisk, asterisk. But here's what I learned in 80 years of guarding this vault. The greatest treasures aren't gold or bonds. They're the choices we make when no one is watching. When we could take the easy path but choose the harder right instead. Asterisk, asterisk. You'll make the right choice. Claire. Michael always said you would. Asterisk, asterisk. H. L. M. Asterisk. Claire closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. The weight of Howard's trust settled over her like a mantle, heavy, but not crushing. He'd given her not just wealth, but permission. Permission to choose, to decide, to shape the legacy of families she'd never known. Claire? Diane's voice was gentle. What does it say? That I have a choice to make, Claire said, wiping her eyes. And about 72 hours before, Gerald Wexler figures out what we found. They climbed back up to the Tollhouse, sealing the entrance panel behind them. The night was fully dark now, but neither of them wanted to leave. They sat in Diane's car, heater running against the cold, while Claire thought about the impossible decision in front of her. $462 million could change Amy's entire life, could change Claire's life. No more double shifts, no more choosing between groceries and Amy's school supplies. College would be a certainty, not a pipe dream. Medical care, security, peace, all within reach. But Howard's words echoed in her mind. Asterisk. The greatest treasures aren't gold or bonds. They're the choices we make when no one is watching. Asterisk. I need to see the records, Claire said finally. The family documentation. Before I decide anything, I need to know who these people were, who might still have a claim. Diane nodded. We can set up a secure workspace. I have a warehouse that's climate-controlled. We could move the documents there, go through everything systematically. How long would that take? Weeks, maybe months, depending on how detailed Howard's records are. Claire thought about her bank account, the sick days she'd already used, the rent due in 2 weeks. She thought about Amy, who deserved so much more than the life they'd been scraping together. And she thought about Michael, about the way he'd always found time to help neighbors even when they couldn't afford their own groceries, about his belief that people who had more were obligated to do more. We start tomorrow, Claire said. But first, we need to handle Gerald. The next morning, Claire met Gerald Wexler at his office, a portable building on the edge of a construction site. She'd dressed in her best work clothes and carried a folder that Diane had prepared overnight. Gerald leaned back in his chair, smug satisfaction written across his face. Deadlines in 3 hours, Claire. You ready to be reasonable? Claire set the folder on his desk. I'm ready to file for historic preservation status. This document confirms that the Old Riverside Bridge Tollhouse was designed by Marcus Tolliver, a noted architect of the 1922nd. That makes it eligible for state and federal preservation grants. Gerald's smile faltered. He opened the folder, scanning the documents. This is bullshit. You're just stalling. I'm following the law. Historic structures are exempt from the county's unsafe building codes during the preservation application process. That's a 90-day window. Claire kept her voice steady, channeling every ounce of the strength Michael had always said she possessed, which means you can't report it, and the county can't fine me. You don't have the money to restore that building. Actually, I do. I've secured financing. It wasn't entirely a lie. The $5 million Howard had set aside for site preservation would more than cover structural repairs. The work begins Monday. Gerald stood, anger darkening his face. You're making a mistake. That property should be mine. Your great-uncle-in-law was a criminal, you know that, right? He helped people hide money from the government. Anything in that vault is proceeds of a crime. Claire's blood ran cold. So Gerald did know about the vault, or at least suspected it. I don't know what you're talking about, she said carefully. There's no vault. Just an old toll house that happens to be historically significant. Gerald leaned across his desk, invading her space. I've been watching that property for 20 years. Ever since Howard Matheson started paying me to do maintenance on it. He was paranoid, obsessive about keeping people away from the foundation. You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't wonder what he was protecting? Then you know he was protecting family history. Nothing more. Bullshit. Gerald pulled out his phone, showing her a photo. It was grainy, but Claire recognized it, the stone panel entrance, visible through a gap in the collapsed floor. I took this 2 days ago, before your friend showed up with her crew. That's not a tollhouse foundation, Claire. That's a bunker entrance. Claire's mind raced. Gerald had evidence. Not of the vault's contents, but of its existence. Enough to cause trouble, to bring in authorities who would start asking questions. What do you want? She asked quietly. Gerald smiled. Partners. 50-50 split of whatever's down there. You need my silence. And you need my construction company to make this look legitimate. I provide both. We both walk away rich. And nobody has to know about Howard Matheson's illegal operation. Every instinct screamed at Claire to refuse. To tell Gerald to go to hell and face whatever consequences came. But she thought about Amy. About the families whose assets sat in that vault. About Howard's legacy of protection. I need time to think, she said. You've got until Monday, when the preservation work is supposed to start. Gerald's smile was predatory. Tick-tock, Claire. She left his office feeling like she might be sick. 50-50. Gerald wanted half of $462 million. Money that wasn't really hers to give, in exchange for keeping quiet about a vault that held the last traces of families who'd died fleeing genocide. Claire drove to Diane's warehouse, where they'd begun moving documents from the vault the night before. Diane took one look at her face and poured her a cup of terrible break-room coffee. "Gerald knows," Claire said, and explained the meeting. Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do you want my honest opinion?" "Always. Call his bluff. If Gerald reports what he thinks he knows, it triggers an investigation. But investigations take time, require warrants, legal processes. And what can he actually prove? That there's a weird foundation under an old building? That's not illegal. But if they investigate, they'll eventually find the vault. Maybe. But by then, you'll have had time to document everything, to prepare a legal strategy, to figure out which families might have descendants." Diane leaned forward. "Claire, you're thinking about this like you're still the person who walked into that Tollhouse 3 days ago. But you're not. You're the legal heir to a legitimate historical treasure wealth that was hidden from Nazis, not from the US government. Howard documented everything. He paid his taxes. This isn't drug money or stolen goods. This is a time capsule of rescued assets. Gerald will make it sound like a crime. Let him try. You have the moral high ground here, and you have resources now. Use them." Claire thought about Howard's journal, about his steady faith in doing the right thing even when it was hard, about Michael's belief in standing up to bullies. "Okay," she said. "We call his bluff, and we work fast to document everything before anyone can muddy the waters." The next 72 hours were a whirlwind. Diane's crew accelerated the Tollhouse restoration, working around the clock to shore up the structure and make it obviously preserved, not obviously hiding something. Claire and Diane spent every spare moment in the warehouse, photographing documents, creating a database of families and assets, trying to build an unassailable record of Howard's work. They found 38 families whose assets had never been claimed. Some had died in the Holocaust. Claire found the documentation, the heartbreaking correspondence that had simply stopped in 1942 or 1943. Others had scattered after the war, their trail going cold in displaced persons, camps, or immigration records. But 6 families had clear, traceable lines. Descendants living in America, Israel, Argentina, people who might not know their grandparents or great-grandparents had left them a legacy with Howard Matheson. Claire made a decision. She hired a genealogist and a lawyer who specialized in Holocaust restitution. The costs ate into her meager savings, but she didn't touch the $5 million preservation fund. That was for the Tollhouse, for protecting the vault itself. This search was her responsibility. On Monday morning, Gerald Wexler showed up at the Tollhouse as restoration work was beginning in earnest. He found Claire supervising the installation of new support beams, very publicly and very legally. "Time's up," he said. "What's your answer?" Claire met his eyes. "I'm not partnering with you. Whatever you think you know, feel free to report it. I've filed all the proper paperwork for historic preservation. Everything I'm doing here is legal and transparent." Gerald's face flushed red. "You're making a huge mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." He left, but Claire knew it wasn't over. Gerald would try something she just didn't know what yet. The answer came 2 days later, when a man in an expensive suit showed up at her apartment. He introduced himself as Martin Carr, attorney for something called the Historical Assets Recovery Foundation. "Miss Matheson," he said, handing her a business card, "I represent several families who believe their ancestors may have entrusted assets to Howard Matheson in the 1920 seconds and 30 seconds. We've been made aware that you've recently taken possession of his former property." Claire's stomach dropped. Gerald had gone to someone with real resources, real legal power. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," she said carefully. Carr smiled. "Let's not play games. My clients are prepared to be very generous in exchange for access to Howard Matheson's records. We're talking about a finder's fee of 10% of any recovered assets. Given the amounts involved, that could be quite substantial for you. 10%, Claire repeated. And the other 90? Would be distributed to rightful heirs according to international restitution protocols. Carr's smile didn't waver. This doesn't have to be adversarial, Miss Matheson. We all want the same thing, to return assets to families who lost everything. But Claire was remembering Howard's journal. His warnings about people who would have opinions about what she should do with the money. About pressure from every direction. I need to think about it, she said. Of course, you have my card. Carr turned to leave, then paused. One thing you should know, my foundation has successfully recovered over $2 billion in assets over the past decade. We have relationships with governments, banks, museums. If assets were illegally concealed, we have the resources to locate them through legal channels. It's always better when property owners cooperate voluntarily. The threat was elegantly delivered, but unmistakable. After Carr left, Claire called the lawyer she'd hired, Rachel Novak. Rachel listened to the story, then let out a low whistle. This Carr guy is the real deal. His foundation does recover assets, but they're also known for aggressive tactics. If they think there's money involved, they'll bury you in litigation until you give up or go broke. Can they actually force me to open the vault? Eventually, maybe. But it would take months, maybe years of legal wrangling. The question is, can you afford that fight? Both financially and emotionally. Claire thought about Amy, about the life they'd been building out of grief and determination, about the simple peace of knowing where next month's rent was coming from. What if I don't fight? She asked. What if I just open it all up? Let the families claim what's theirs. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then you walk away with nothing. Or close to it. The unclaimed assets would probably end up in state custody, absorbed into unclaimed property funds. You'd lose any control over how Howard's legacy is used. Would that be so bad? That depends. Do you think the state of New York will honor Howard Matheson's intention to help families fleeing persecution? Or do you think they'll just absorb millions into general funds and forget where it came from? Claire closed her eyes. Every choice seemed to lead to complications, to more questions without clear answers. That night, she tucked Amy into bed and sat with her daughter in the quiet dark, stroking her hair the way Michael used to. Mama? Amy's voice was sleepy. Are you sad about Uncle Howard's house? A little. It's complicated, sweetheart. Miss Jenkins says complicated just means there's more than one right answer. Miss Jenkins was Amy's teacher, a woman Claire had never met but was starting to really appreciate. She says when there's more than one right answer, you just have to pick the one that helps the most people. Out of the mouths of babes, Claire thought. She kissed Amy's forehead and sat in the dark for a long time after her daughter fell asleep. The next morning, Claire called a meeting at Diane's warehouse. In attendance, Rachel Novak, the genealogist they'd hired, a woman named Sarah Blum, who specialized in Holocaust families, and Diane herself. I've made a decision, Claire said. We're going to do exactly what Howard intended. We're going to find every family we can and return their assets. The ones we can't find, we're going to create a foundation in Howard's name. A foundation that helps refugees and immigrants, families fleeing persecution, people who need protection. Claire, Rachel said gently, that's going to make you a target. Every vulture in the financial world will come after that money. Let them come. We'll have documentation. We'll be transparent. Everything. Legal. And public. And Gerald, Wexler, Martin Carr's foundation. Gerald can report whatever he wants. We're not hiding anything. And Mr. Carr's foundation is welcome to help us locate families as volunteers, not as paid facilitators. If they actually care about restitution, they'll help. If they just want money, they'll sue, and we'll deal with that. Sarah Blum leaned forward. Her elderly face creased with something like hope. You understand what you're proposing? The work involved? I have some idea. Do you though? Sarah pulled out a folder. I've been doing this work for 40 years. I've helped reunite families with assets worth millions. And I can tell you, it's complicated, emotionally draining, and you'll make enemies with every decision. She paused. It's also the most important work I've ever done. Claire looked at the three women around the table, each bringing expertise she didn't have, each willing to help shoulder the burden Howard had carried alone for 8 decades. Then let's do it right, she said. The transformation happened gradually, then all at once. The Tollhouse restoration became a media story. Local news at first, then regional, then national. The tale of a widow inheriting a collapsed building and discovering a Holocaust-era vault captured imaginations. Claire refused most interview requests, but she released a statement through Rachel. All assets would be returned to families wherever possible, and unclaimed assets would fund refugee assistance programs. She included a list of the 38 families whose records existed in Howard's files, asking anyone with information about descendants to come forward. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, Claire had been contacted by a dozen people claiming family connections. Some were legitimate. Sarah Blum verified their documentation, matched their stories to Howard's meticulous records. Others were frauds, opportunists smelling money. Gerald Wexler tried to file a lawsuit claiming he was owed compensation for discovering the vault. It was dismissed when Claire's lawyer presented security footage showing Gerald had been hired as a maintenance contractor and had violated his access agreement by photographing the structure without permission. Martin Carr's Historical Assets Recovery Foundation took a different approach. They filed a claim on behalf of unidentified families, arguing that all unclaimed assets should be turned over to an international tribunal for distribution. It was a clever legal strategy that would have tied everything up for years. But Claire had a strategy of her own. She went public with Howard's journals carefully redacted to protect living family members, but detailed enough to show his methodical protection of specific families. She showed how he'd tried to locate heirs, how he'd kept faith even when it seemed impossible. And then she announced the creation of the Howard Matheson Refugee Trust, funded by the unclaimed assets. The trust's mission: providing legal assistance, housing support, and integration resources for refugees and asylum seekers. Everything Howard's families had needed when they fled Europe. Public opinion shifted dramatically. What had started as a legal fight over hidden wealth became a story about honoring the legacy of families who died fleeing genocide. Martin Carr's foundation quietly withdrew their claim, unable to compete with the moral clarity of Claire's approach. 6 months after Claire first stood at the edge of the collapsed Tollhouse, she returned to the site. The building had been fully restored, transformed into a museum and education center. The vault beneath remained intact, preserved as a historical site, its contents catalogued and legally established. 5 of the 6 families they'd located had successfully claimed their inheritances, assets that had waited 8 decades to find their way home. The 6th family was still being located, but Sarah Blum was confident they would find the descendants within the year. The Howard Matheson Refugee Trust had been established with $287 million in unclaimed assets, more than enough to fund operations in perpetuity. The first recipients of assistance had been a family from Syria, then another from Afghanistan, then a single mother with 3 children fleeing domestic violence in Honduras. Claire stood in the museum space, looking at the exhibits that told Howard's story and the stories of the families he'd helped. Amy ran ahead, already familiar with the space, proudly showing visiting school groups the secret entrance to the vault. "She's got your great-uncle's determination," Diane said, joining Claire by the window overlooking the river. "That man carried this secret alone for 80 years. You turned it into something that helps thousands." "I just did what Howard asked," Claire said. "Made a choice when no one was watching." "Yeah, but you made the harder choice. You could be living in a mansion right now." Claire smiled, watching Amy gesture enthusiastically. at a group of fourth graders. "We have what we need." The trust set aside enough for Amy's education and basic security. Anything more than that would have just been weight. The museum was free to the public, but visitors left donations that helped fund the ongoing educational programs. The Tollhouse that had been a collapsed embarrassment, a burden Claire couldn't afford, had become something that served the very purpose Howard had envisioned. That evening, back in their apartment, still small, still modest, but now secure, Claire made dinner while Amy did homework at the kitchen table. They'd settled into a new rhythm, one that included occasional trips to the museum, regular meetings with the trust board, and a slowly growing understanding that their lives had changed in fundamental ways. A knock at the door interrupted the comfortable quiet. Claire opened it to find an elderly woman standing in the hallway, clutching a folder. "Miss Matheson, my name is Ruth Goldstein. I think my family's story is in your museum." Claire invited her in, and over tea. Ruth explained. Her grandparents had fled Berlin in 1938, leaving their life savings with an American banker named Howard Matheson. They'd told Ruth's father about it before they died, but he'd never believed them, thought it was just old people's fantasies of lost wealth. "Then I saw the news coverage," Ruth said, her hands shaking as she opened the folder. "And I found these letters my grandmother saved, letters from Howard Matheson, promising their money was safe, telling them to keep hope." Claire looked through the letters, her throat tight. This was one of the families they'd been trying to locate, descendants who'd scattered to California after the war. "There's an account waiting for your family," Claire said gently. "Gold certificates worth about $8 million at today's value." Howard kept his promise. Ruth began to cry, quiet tears that spoke of generations of loss and survival. "My grandmother used to say, 'Ruth, we lost everything but our lives, and lives are enough.' But to know that someone protected even a small piece of what they built, what they had to leave behind." She looked up at Claire, and in her eyes was the weight of everything Howard had done, everything Claire was trying to preserve. "Thank you for not keeping it," Ruth said. "Thank you for understanding that some fortunes belong to more than just one person." After Ruth left, promising to return with her full family documentation, Claire sat with Amy on the couch, her daughter curled against her side. "Was that lady happy or sad?" Amy asked. "Both, I think. Sometimes the most important feelings are both at once. Like how you feel about Daddy." Claire kissed the top of Amy's head. "Yeah, baby. Like that." They sat together in the quiet apartment, surrounded by the ordinary details of their ordinary life. But Claire knew now that ordinary was a kind of treasure too. The simple fact of having enough, of being secure, of knowing tomorrow would come and they'd face it together, that was worth more than all the gold in Howard's vault. A year later, the Tollhouse Museum had become a destination for historians and families researching their own stories of flight and survival. The Howard Matheson Refugee Trust had assisted over 300 families, providing everything from legal representation to job training to emergency housing. Claire had taken a position as the trust's executive director, using her nursing background to understand the trauma and needs of people fleeing violence. The work was hard, often heartbreaking, but it gave her a purpose that serving coffee and pills had never provided. Gerald Wexler had left Cedar Falls after his construction business collapsed, unable to recover from the reputational damage of trying to steal a Holocaust vault. Claire didn't take pleasure in his downfall, but she didn't lose sleep over it either. Martin Carr's foundation had actually reached out to partner with the trust, their adversarial approach transformed by the positive publicity Claire had generated. Together, they'd located 7 more families with unclaimed assets in Howard's records. But the moment that meant most to Claire came on an ordinary Tuesday, when she was giving a tour to a local elementary school. A boy raised his hand during the Q&A portion. "Miss Claire, did the families who got their money back stay in America?" Claire smiled. "Most did. A few returned to Europe after the war. But what mattered wasn't where they went. It was that they had choices. That's what Howard gave them. That's what this place is about. The boy nodded thoughtfully. My family came from Guatemala. We lived in a shelter for 3 months when we first got here. Did the trust help you? Yeah. They found my mom a job and helped us get an apartment. The boy's face brightened. And now my mom says she's saving money, so I can go to college someday. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. This was what $467 million could do when it was transformed from personal wealth into communal support. Not one family lifted out of struggle, but hundreds, each finding their footing in a world that had seemed impossibly hostile. That evening, Claire returned to the apartment to find Amy working on a school project. Her daughter had spread papers across the floor, a family tree assignment that required going back 3 generations. Mama, can you help me? I need to know about Daddy's family. Claire sat down beside her daughter, and together they filled in names. Michael's parents, his grandparents, and at the top of one branch, Howard Lawrence Matheson. What should I write about Uncle Howard? Amy asked. Miss Jenkins says we're supposed to include something special about each person. Claire thought about the collapsed Tollhouse, the hidden vault, the fortune that had transformed from a burden into a blessing. Write that he kept promises, she said finally. Even when it was hard, even when it took his whole life. Amy carefully wrote the words in her neat, careful handwriting. Then she looked up at her mother. Like you? Claire pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and childhood and hope. I'm trying, baby. I'm trying. Outside the window, the city lights of Cedar Falls glowed in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in those lights were families the trust had helped, lives slowly rebuilding from fragments and faith. And somewhere, Claire liked to think, Howard Matheson was watching, satisfied that his life's work had found worthy hands. The collapsed Tollhouse had held $467 million. But what it really held was something more valuable, the proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose to carry the weight of other people's hopes. Claire had inherited a building everyone said was worthless, a burden she couldn't afford. But she'd found something beyond price, a purpose that transformed grief into service, isolation into community, and a forgotten fortune into a living memorial for everyone who'd ever needed refuge. The greatest treasure, she'd learned, wasn't what you found, it was what you chose to do with it after. And Claire Matheson, widow and nurse's aide and keeper of Howard's promise, had chosen well. 5 years had passed since that November morning, when Claire first stood at the edge of the collapsed Tollhouse, and the world had rearranged itself in ways she never could have imagined. The museum had expanded twice, adding wings dedicated to immigrant stories from every continent, every generation of flight and survival. But it was the unexpected letter that arrived on a rain-swept Tuesday morning that would reshape everything once more. Claire sat in her office at the Trust headquarters, no longer the cramped warehouse space, but a restored historic building, downtown, that had once been a bank. The irony wasn't lost on her. She opened the envelope, noting the Israeli postmark, the formal legal seal. Asterisk. Dear Miss Matheson. Asterisk. My name is Dr. Sarah Rosenfeld. I am writing to you on behalf of my mother, Eva Rosenfeld, who passed away 3 months ago at the age of 96. In her final days, she told me a story I had never heard before, about a man named Howard Matheson, who saved not just her family's wealth, but their lives. Asterisk. My grandmother, Rachel Stern, fled Vienna in 1938 with my mother, who was only 10 years old. They were supposed to meet my grandfather in New York, but he never made it out of Austria. My grandmother entrusted Howard Matheson with everything they had: gold, jewelry, and something else. Something she made him promise to keep secret even from other families he was helping. Asterisk. My mother said there was a second vault, a smaller one, hidden even from the records Howard kept. She said her mother made him promise that if they didn't survive, if no one came to claim it, he should use what was inside for the children who would come after. Asterisk, asterisk. My mother spent her whole life wondering what was in that vault, but she honored her mother's wish not to search for it while Howard was alive. Now that both Howard and my mother are gone, I feel compelled to tell you there may be more to discover beneath that Tollhouse than even, asterisk, asterisk. I've enclosed my grandmother's original correspondence with Howard. In one letter, written in code my mother only deciphered years later, she mentions the children's treasure, buried deeper than gold, protected by the keeper's own heart. Asterisk, asterisk. If this means anything to you, please contact me. My mother's dying wish was that whatever remained should serve the purpose her mother intended. Asterisk. Claire read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking slightly. She looked at the enclosed document's letters in German, photographed and translated. And there, in Rachel Stern's elegant handwriting, the coded reference to something else, something buried deeper. She called Diane immediately. "You're not going to believe this," Claire said, and explained the letter. Diane was quiet for a long moment. "Claire, we mapped that entire foundation 5 years ago. We used ground-penetrating radar, structural analysis, everything. There's no second vault. What if it's not in the foundation? What if it's somewhere else on the property? Where? We own 5 acres. It could be anywhere." Claire pulled up the architectural drawings they'd made during the restoration, spreading them across her desk. Rachel Stern's letter says, "Protected by the keeper's own heart." Howard was the keeper. His heart. And then she saw it. The Tollhouse had been Howard's post, yes, but he'd lived somewhere else. There was a small caretaker's cottage on the property, barely noticeable, that they'd restored but never fully explored. It sat at the eastern edge of the property, tucked into a grove of old oak trees. The cottage, Claire said. He lived there for 40 years. If he had something personal to hide, something he wanted to protect with his own presence. "I'll get my crew," Diane said. "Give me 2 hours." By afternoon, Claire stood in the cottage that had been Howard Matheson's home. It was small, just 3 rooms and a bath, but it had been restored to its 1922 character as part of the museum expansion. Visitors rarely came here, preferring the drama of the main Tollhouse and vault. Diane's crew had brought portable ground-penetrating radar equipment. They moved through the cottage systematically, scanning floors and walls. For an hour, they found nothing unusual. Then, beneath the bedroom floor, the readings changed. "There's a void," Diane's technician said, pointing to the screen. "About 6 feet down. Looks deliberately constructed, not a natural cavity." They pulled up the floorboards carefully. These were historic materials, not to be damaged lightly. Beneath the boards, beneath a layer of concrete that had been poured decades ago, they found stone. And set into the stone, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, was a small metal handle. Claire's heart pounded as she knelt beside the opening. This was Howard's most private space, the place he'd return to every night after guarding the main vault. If he'd hidden something here, it was something that mattered to him personally. The stone lifted more easily than the main vault's entrance had, as if it had been designed for regular access. A ladder led down into darkness, and Claire descended with Diane right behind her. The space below was tiny compared to the main vault, maybe 8 feet square. But what it contained made Claire's breath catch. This wasn't about gold or bonds. The walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them. Faces of children, preserved in frames that had protected them from time and moisture. Children Howard had helped save, she realized. Each photograph labeled with a name, a date, a destination, and in the center of the small room, on a simple wooden table, sat a metal box similar to the one Claire had found 5 years ago. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside were letters, not from families asking for help, but from children writing to thank Mr. Howard for saving them. Letters written in cramped English by kids learning a new language. decorated with crayons and earnest drawings of houses and families and hope. Asterisk. Dear Mr. Howard. Asterisk, asterisk. Thank you for helping my mama bring me to America. I am learning English at school. My teacher says I am very smart. When I grow up, I want to help people like you helped us. Asterisk, asterisk. Love, Eva times Eva. Dr. Sarah Rosenfeld's mother. Claire found photograph after photograph of a young girl with dark curls and serious eyes, tracking her growth from age 10 to 15, in images Howard had carefully preserved. He never forgot them, Claire whispered. Any of them. Diane had moved to the far wall, where a larger frame hung. She called Claire over, her voice thick with emotion. The frame contained a document, Howard's actual will, the personal one, not the legal version that had been filed with courts. It was handwritten, dated just weeks before his death. Asterisk. To whoever finds this place, probably Claire, if I've judged correctly. Asterisk. Asterisk. The main vault was about honoring obligations. This space is about honoring love. Asterisk. Asterisk. These children represent my real wealth. Every face you see here is a life that continued because people chose courage over comfort. Their parents chose to flee. I chose to help. And they chose to survive. Asterisk. Asterisk. Rachel Stern asked me to create this memorial. She said the world would forget the children unless someone remembered their faces, their names, their specific existence. The Holocaust tried to erase millions of individual stories, reducing lives to numbers. This room says, they were not numbers. They were Eva, and David, and Sarah, and Michael, and Ruth. Asterisk. Asterisk. Rachel left additional resources for this room's purpose bonds. I never recorded in the main vault, kept separate at her insistence. She wanted them used specifically for children, not adults rebuilding lives, but children who need protection, education, a chance to become who they're meant to be. Asterisk. Asterisk. The bonds are in the locked drawer beneath this table. Current value is approximately $50 million. I've kept them separate from the main trust, because Rachel made me promise they would serve only the youngest refugees, children who arrive alone, children who've lost family, children who need not just shelter, but someone to remember their names. Asterisk. Asterisk. Create something that honors these faces, Claire. Give other children what these children found. Someone who will guard not just their physical safety, but their individual stories. Someone who will remember their names. Asterisk. Claire opened the locked drawer. The key had been in the metal box with the letters. Inside were bearer bonds, meticulously organized, along with a ledger showing their current value. Howard had been managing them right up until his death, ensuring they kept pace with inflation. $50 million. For children, specifically, for the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. Claire looked around the room at the faces, staring back at her. Eva, whose daughter had written the letter that led here. David, whose grandson now served on the trust's board. Sarah, Ruth, Michael, all grown now, grandparents themselves, living proof that rescue worked, that protection mattered. We need to build something new, Claire said. Not an expansion of what exists, but something specifically for unaccompanied minors, children who cross borders alone, who arrive at shelters traumatized and terrified. Diane nodded slowly. A children's home, like Howard originally envisioned for the main property. More than that, a place that remembers their names, that documents their stories, that treats them like the individuals they are, not just cases to be processed. Claire touched one of the photographs gently. Rachel Stern understood something that took me years to learn. The greatest violence isn't just physical harm. It's erasure. Being treated like you don't matter, like you're interchangeable. Over the next 6 months, Claire assembled a team unlike any she'd worked with before. Child psychologists, trauma specialists, educators who'd worked with unaccompanied minors. They designed a facility that would house up to 50 children at a time, providing not just shelter, but healing. The Rachel Stern Children's Home opened on what would have been Eva Rosenfeld's 97th birthday. Dr. Sarah Rosenfeld flew in from Israel for the dedication, bringing with her something unexpected. A photo album her mother had kept, filled with pictures of the life Eva had built after arriving in America. "My mother never forgot what Howard Matheson did," Sarah told the assembled crowd. "She became a teacher specifically because she wanted to help children the way she'd been helped. She spent 40 years teaching immigrant kids in New York public schools." Sarah opened the album to a specific page, a photograph of Eva, elderly but vital, surrounded by dozens of former students at a retirement celebration. The caption read, *Mrs. Rosenfeld, with the 847 students whose names she remembers. 847, Sarah repeated. She kept a journal with all their names, where they came from, what they hoped to become. She said Howard taught her that remembering names was the first step in seeing people as human. Claire felt tears stream down her face. This was the legacy Rachel Stern had wanted. Not gold that could be spent, but purpose that could be replicated. The act of witnessing, of remembering, of treating each child as infinitely valuable. The first children arrived at the Rachel Stern home the following week. 12 kids, ages 6 to 15, from 7 different countries. Claire met each one personally, learning their names, hearing their stories, as much as they were willing to share. There was Carlos, 8 years old, who'd traveled from Honduras alone after his mother was killed. Maria, 13, who'd fled gang violence in El Salvador. Ahmed, 6, who remembered very little about Syria, except the sound of bombs. Each child was given a room with their name on the door, not a number, not a bed assignment, but their actual name in letters they could read. Each child's photograph was taken and hung in the memorial gallery, joining the faces from Howard's hidden room. Not a memorial to the dead, but a celebration of the living. Amy, now 12 and increasingly involved in the Trust's work, volunteered at the home after school. Claire watched her daughter teaching English to younger children, showing them around Cedar Falls, introducing them to the library and the park and the ordinary magic of a safe place. "You know, what's weird?" Amy said one evening over dinner. "These kids have been through terrible things, but they're not that different from me. They like the same music, worry about the same stuff. They're just kids." "That's exactly the point," Claire said. "They're just kids." That's what Howard understood. That's what Rachel Stern insisted we remember. 2 years after opening, the Rachel Stern home had served 143 children. Some stayed for months, moving on when family could be located or foster situations arranged. Others stayed longer, needing time to heal before transitioning to permanent homes. But every single child, before they left, participated in a ceremony Claire had designed. They stood in the memorial gallery, looking at the photographs of children Howard had helped save 80 years ago. And then they added their own photograph to the wall, their own story to the record. "You are seen," Claire told each child. "You are remembered. Your name matters. Your story matters. Whatever happens next in your life, you will always be part of this place, and this place will always hold space for you." The ceremony was simple, but its impact was profound. Children who'd arrived hollow-eyed and silent began to stand straighter, speak louder, believe in their own significance. Dr. Sarah Rosenfeld returned for the home's 2nd anniversary celebration. She was elderly now, her health failing, but she insisted on making the trip from Israel. "I needed to see this," she told Claire as they walked through the gallery where new photographs joined old ones. "My mother died wondering if her mother's sacrifice had mattered, if the wealth they'd hidden with Howard had served its purpose." Claire gestured to the photographs, children from Guatemala and Syria, from Afghanistan and Congo, from Ukraine and Myanmar. Rachel's legacy isn't just this building. It's the understanding that rescue isn't one time. Each generation has children who need protection, and each generation has to choose whether to provide it. Sarah stopped in front of a photograph of a young girl, maybe 9, with serious eyes and a tentative smile. Who is she? Her name is Amara. She arrived 6 months ago from Ethiopia, orphaned by violence. She couldn't speak when she got here, not just because of language, but because trauma had stolen her voice. Claire smiled. Last week, she sang at our talent show. She has the most beautiful voice. Sarah touched the photograph gently. My mother would have loved that. She always said singing was how she knew she'd survived, when she could open her mouth and sound came out instead of silence. That evening, Claire found Sarah sitting alone in Howard's hidden room beneath the cottage, surrounded by the photographs of children saved decades ago. Thank you, Sarah said simply, for honoring what my grandmother wanted, for understanding that wealth isn't just about money. It's about what money can become when it's transformed by purpose. I'm the one who should thank you, Claire replied. Your letter led me here, to understanding that Howard's legacy was bigger than I'd imagined. Sarah shook her head. You would have found this eventually. People like you, like Howard, you can't help but dig deeper, look further, ask if there's more to be done. She paused, looking around the small room. My grandmother used to say that the greatest treasure she left with Howard wasn't the bonds or gold. It was the trust that he would remember. That even if she and my mother died, someone would know they'd existed. They'd mattered. They mattered, Claire said firmly. And they still do. Every child we help is an echo of that original courage. Your grandmother's courage to flee, Howard's courage to help, your mother's courage to survive, and your courage to continue, Sarah added. Don't underestimate that, Claire. It would have been easier to keep the money, to walk away from the responsibility. You chose the harder path. Claire thought about that word, courage. She'd never felt particularly courageous. She'd felt desperate, overwhelmed, sometimes terrified by the weight of what she'd inherited. But maybe that was what courage looked like. Doing the right thing, even when you were scared. Especially when you were scared. As the anniversary celebration wound down and guests departed, Claire found herself alone in the museum, walking the familiar path from the main Tollhouse to the cottage, past the memorial gardens where plaques honored families whose stories intersected with Howard's. She thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, exhausted, grieving, barely holding on. She thought about the letter that had changed everything, the collapsed building that had hidden such profound purpose. The Tollhouse stood solid now, its restoration complete, its transformation from ruin to refuge, a physical metaphor for what was possible when people chose connection over isolation, community over individual gain. Claire's phone buzzed with a text from Amy. Mom, Carlos got his foster placement. He's going to a family in Vermont. He wanted to say goodbye before you left tonight. Claire headed to the children's home, where she found Carlos in the memorial gallery, looking at his photograph on the wall. I'll remember this place, he said in careful English. When I grow up, I want to help kids like me. Claire had heard versions of this statement dozens of times. Children who'd been helped, vowing to help others. The cycle continuing, expanding, reaching forward into a future none of them could fully see. You will, Claire told him. And when you do, you'll understand what I'm only beginning to learn, that the greatest treasures aren't things we keep. They're things we pass forward. Carlos nodded solemnly, then surprised her with a hug. Thank you for remembering my name. After he left, Claire stood alone in the gallery, surrounded by faces both old and new. Howard Matheson's hidden memorial had become something larger, a testament to the ongoing work of protection, the endless need for refuge, the permanent truth that children needed adults willing to remember their names. The collapsed Tollhouse had held $467 million in its foundation vault, but the cottage had held something more valuable. The understanding that wealth meant nothing if it didn't serve human dignity. That rescue was meaningless if it didn't honor individual worth. Claire locked up the museum and drove home through Cedar Falls streets that no longer felt hostile or dismissive. The town had learned what she'd learned, that inheritance wasn't about what you received, but about what you chose to build with it. And Claire Matheson, keeper of Howard's promises and Rachel's vision, had built something that would outlast them all. A place where children's names were remembered, where their stories mattered, where refuge meant not just physical safety, but profound recognition of human worth. The treasure beneath the Tollhouse had been found, but the real treasure, the one that kept giving, kept growing, kept transforming, was the choice to honor it properly. And that was a fortune that could never be depleted. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.